So, you've decided to either run or be a player in a D&D campaign. Congratulations! You've taken the first step in leading a happier and all-around better life, and your friends and family will love you for it. Today in the D&D segment of the podcast, we'll be talking about what I believe is probably the most important part of a Dungeons & Dragons game, and hell, it's probably the most important part of any tabletop RPG that you may be interested in playing. I'm talking about the all-powerful Session Zero. Now some of you listeners may be thinking to yourself, Ryan, what in the fuck is a Session Zero? And that's perfectly okay because that's what I'm here to explain. Session Zero, in short, is a time before the actual campaign starts where you as a GM or DM and your players can hash out any and all questions about the campaign to avoid being blindsided by anything. You're essentially streamlining the gameplay before it happens because as some players know, when everyone is working out kinks in their PCs or the campaign itself, it leads to a pretty unproductive first session, hence why we have the Session Zero. Now what questions could pop up during this session? Well, honestly a lot, but I'll try to stick to the big ones that come up on a regular basis. For starters, what kind of campaign do the players want? Are they interested in a hack and slash where they can be like Kratos the God of War, mowing down hordes of enemies with ease? Or do they want a game with a heavy focus on narrative storytelling? Maybe they want a goofy game that's based off of Monty Python. Maybe they want a game of intrigue where espionage is key and subtlety is how you win. Maybe they want a hybrid of all these things at some point. There are tons of things your players can expect from a game, and it's up to you as the DM to hear them out. Maybe even consider at some point telling them what kind of game that you were hoping to run, because chances are, if you wanted to do it, you'll probably do it well, or at least better than the other options presented. After that's out of the way, as a collective group, come to a compromise and make the game all of you are happy to be a part of. Another thing to clear up in a Session Zero is any kind of homebrewing. For those of you who don't know what homebrewing is, the textbook definition is any content within a Dungeons & Dragons game that cannot be found in an official rulebook. The name says it all. It's different things that you implement that are not in the rulebook and specific to your game, which means homebrew rules vary. A lot. Do you have this insanely wild mashup of class abilities and paths to make your Bugbear Snake Charm a reality? Who knows? But it's the perfect thing to bring up and see if it'll even be allowed. Maybe you've stumbled across a new way to do combat that's vastly different from the rules as written and you want to play test it in this campaign. That's perfectly fine and acceptable, but give the players and DM the courtesy of a heads up when it comes to any kind of homebrewing in the game, whether it be on your end as the DM or if it's from their end as players in your world. In addition to any homebrew you may have going on in game, something to talk about is general table rules. What am I referring to when I say table rules? Well, who's bringing food? Drinks, who's hosting the game at all. Is alcohol allowed? I say yes to that, but boy, is that a fun tightrope to walk. Have you ever blacked out at the table because your group decided it'd be a good idea to drink in real life if your character drinks in game? Yeah, crazy time. Debauchery was had, but little to no progress was made. But we play the game to have fun, so it's fine. Besides the acquisition of consumables, other things to bring up is the comfortability levels your players have when it comes to topics that are typically seen as disruptive, such as politics, religion, player versus player, etc., etc. Games are usually made up of people who are friends in real life, but just because you're friends doesn't mean your playstyles mesh well. Session Zeros take care of that by at least mitigating the tension that could have been built up by putting it all on the table from the start. Next up on the chopping block, and probably the most time-consuming part of any RPG, video game, or tabletop, character creation and character knowledge. Maybe your player is finally tired of being that edgelord rogue and has decided to pick a new class. Maybe the player is new to the game altogether. Since Session Zeros usually don't have a set time limit, this is the perfect time to explain a character class to someone and how to play them. Have the players prepared their backstories? Do they even know why they're adventuring together as a group? It's things that need to be figured out to streamline gameplay once Session 1 actually happens. There's nothing more demoralizing than hearing, well, I just met you guys today, so I'm going to go run off and do my own thing. No, that's not what happens. Don't split the party Session 1 if you don't want to re-roll your character and go through the entire character creation process again, which, the newer you are, the longer it takes. So, 2 hours, you rolled one bad roll, made a bad decision, and guess what? Now you get to make another character for another 2 hours. It's those kinds of things that turn people off from Dungeons & Dragons in the first place, is how time-consuming character creation is. Getting back on track with character creation, a Session Zero is the perfect time for a DM to let the players know what books will be allowed in the campaign. For those of you who don't know, Over the years, Dungeons & Dragons has released many books that bring in additional content to the game, which brings in new races, new rules, new spells, new classes, new pathways those classes can take, etc., etc., etc. It brings in a whole new world in a game where new worlds are the norm. Now, why is it important to know what books are allowed in a campaign? Well, long story short, certain classes and races aren't viable if those books are not allowed. You could have a concept in your mind, and if the DM has decided he does not want to use those books, you're going to have to make a new character. The list of things that can be discussed at a session 0 are as numerous as the people who play the game. We could talk about power gaming, which is whenever a person makes the most efficient character that they can to put out the most damage that they can. It's basically someone who plays the game that's trying to quote-unquote win the game and be the best person in the campaign. We could also talk about metagaming. That's whenever someone brings outside knowledge into the game that their character would not know to help them in the game. We could talk about the social contract that some people believe we enter whenever we agree to play in a Dungeons & Dragons game. How are stats done? What's the starting location? What's the political, socioeconomic climate of that starting location? All of these are valid things to talk about at Session 0. And honestly, Session 0s vary so heavily. One could have 4 questions, the other could have a 50-question questionnaire asking you the most minute details of your character's background. It honestly just depends on the DM or GM. I just chose to go in depth with the things that I believe will improve the quality of the Session 0s that you're already having, if you're already having them, and hopefully make a decent argument if you're not having them to start having them. The key thing to remember here is that the Session 0 is predominantly a tool for the DM or GM. They can learn what type of game is desired by the group and make the appropriate adjustments to the concept they've already had in mind. Even though a Session 0 is mostly beneficial for the DM, it is without a doubt a tool for players to use to get the game that you want to play. Tools are only useful if you actually use them. Well, that's the rundown of a Session 0. I hope it opened your eyes to the importance of having one and maybe even improve the quality of your future Session 0s. At the end of the day, Dungeons & Dragons is a game, emphasis on the game part. Have fun with it. Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast, and I hope you tune in for the next one. Ryan out.